My daughter called to tell me I was too casual to attend my own granddaughter's 7th birthday. Her husband's family was coming. I might make them uncomfortable. I said, "I understand, sweetheart," and hung up. Then I opened the drawer I had labeled 3 years ago in case they forget who I am. What they forgot was that I owned the building his restaurant stood in, and I had never once told him. Before I tell you what was inside that drawer, drop a comment right now. Where are you watching from? And have you ever smiled at someone who had no idea what was coming? Because that is exactly what I did. I did not argue. I did not cry. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, stood there for about 10 seconds, listening to the refrigerator hum, and then I walked to my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my mahogany desk. The drawer nobody had ever thought to look in. Under a manila envelope and an expired car insurance policy was that file. I had prayed I would never need it. That Tuesday evening in April, I was done praying. My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 68 years old. I keep a small vegetable garden, a cat named Earl, and a 2-bedroom house on Elm Creek Lane that I paid cash for in 2019. My daughter, Claire, has always believed I live on a modest pension and what she calls with a small apologetic smile, my little savings. She tells people her mother was a caterer. She says it the way someone mentions they used to drive a Pontiac. Quickly moving on. I never corrected her. I told myself it was humility. But looking back, maybe I was just making it easier for everyone to underestimate me. What Claire never asked, and I have genuinely turned this over in my mind many times, is what I actually built before I retired. She was planning a spring formal when I signed the acquisition paperwork. She never read the number on that check. I did not show her. Mothers carry things quietly, thinking they are protecting their children. Sometimes they are just making themselves invisible. Have you ever kept something important from someone you love, thinking it was for their own good? I spent 40 years building Holloway Fine Catering, from a church kitchen and a van with a broken heater. When the regional hospitality group acquired us in 2016, we had 12 employees, 4 trucks contracts with 3 hospital networks. I walked out of that attorney's office with enough money to disappear. I did not disappear. I invested. 3 commercial properties downtown, 2 leased to small businesses. The 3rd, a restored brick building on Merchant Street with original hardwood floors and good natural light. I leased to my son-in-law, Derek, at 40% below market rate when he announced he was opening a farm-to-table restaurant. I did it for Claire. Derek never asked why the rent was so low. People like Derek do not ask questions that might complicate the story they tell about themselves. The birthday call came that Tuesday evening. Claire's voice was careful the way it always is when Derek has coached her beforehand. She told me Gerald and Patricia, Derek's parents, were flying in from Connecticut last minute. Very formal people. Very particular about atmosphere. The party was at the club, and Derek felt it might be easier if the guest list stayed within their circle. She paused. Then she said, "I could sometimes be a little casual." That was her word. Casual. I had buried a husband. I had sat in hospital waiting rooms at 3 a.m. and still made it to Claire's school plays by 7:30. 40 years of 70-hour weeks, and the word my daughter chose was casual. What would you have said right at that moment if you were me? "I understand," I said. "Enjoy the party, sweetheart." I hung up. I opened the drawer. Then I did something I had not done in years. I picked up the phone and called Francis Doyle, my attorney, at 7 in the evening. Francis charges $400 an hour and is worth every cent. I told her what I needed. She was quiet for a moment, The kind of quiet that means she is thinking, not hesitating. Margaret, she said, I want to make sure you are certain. I told her I had never been more certain of anything in my professional life. She had the paperwork started before I went to bed. I watered the garden-fed Earl and slept better than I had in 6 months. A decision once made is its own kind of rest. 3 days later, Derek received a certified letter at the restaurant. It informed him that effective 60 days from that date, the lease for 114 Merchant Street would be renegotiated to reflect the current market rate, 41%, above what he had been paying. It also noted that a financial audit had identified 4 years of below-market rent, totaling just over $60,000, which the landlord was calling in as a formal loan per a supplemental clause in the original lease agreement, a clause Derek had signed. Frances had insisted on that clause in 2020. She called it standard protection. I called it excessive caution. We were both wrong about which of us was right. What do you think Derek did the moment he read that letter? Claire called me 40 minutes after delivery. Voice raw, tight around the edges. Derek was beside himself. He said I was trying to destroy his business. I was pouring afternoon tea. I set the kettle down slowly. It is a lease amendment, I said, and a repayment notice for a loan I have been providing quietly for 4 years. It is all in the agreement Derek signed. She said he did not know it was a loan. He thought the rent was just the rent. He assumed, I said. There is a difference. Long pause. Then she told me the restaurant was already struggling, that Derek had quietly taken out a second business loan in January without telling her, that if the rent increased and I called in the $60,000, I told her he should speak with his bank and perhaps with his parents in Connecticut. They seem like resourceful people. She did not have an answer for that. So, this is where I thought the story would end. A correction. A family recalibrating around honesty. But 3 days later, Frances sent me a second file. She'd pulled public records on Gerald and Patricia Whitmore, the particular Connecticut people whose comfort had mattered more than my seat at my granddaughter's birthday. What she found was not a couple of means. It was a couple who had legally changed their surname 18 months earlier from Whitmer to Whitmore. Gerald Whitmer had a civil judgment against him in New Haven for investment fraud totaling $230,000. The couple had sold their home under a relative's name to avoid a lien. They had arrived in our city not for a birthday party. They had arrived with 4 suitcases, 3 shipping boxes marked fragile, and no confirmed return flight. They had moved in. When you realize the people you were pushed aside to make room for were running from the law, what do you feel first? I sat with that file for a long time. Earl was in my lap. The evening light going gold over the tomato plants outside. I was not angry. I was something colder than angry, because I suddenly understood that I had not just been excluded from a birthday party. I had been strategically removed. Derek needed me gone before I noticed the boxes that never got unpacked, before I asked Gerald why he never mentioned a return flight. The uninviting was not an insult. It was a tactical move, and my daughter had delivered it without knowing what she was carrying. I picked up the phone and called Claire, not to punish her, because she deserved to know who was sleeping in her guest room. Claire, I said, I need to ask you something. When are Gerald and Patricia going home? Derek had told her maybe the end of summer. They were between places. Between places, I repeated. Honey, sit down. I told her everything. The civil judgment, the name change, the foreclosure on a home that no longer existed in their names. I emailed her the documents as we spoke. I heard her breathing change on the other end of the line. I heard the exact moment when something she had believed for months simply stopped being true. Have you ever had to be the one who tells someone they have been lied to by someone they love? He told me they were downsizing, she whispered. He said they sold the house because they wanted to travel. She stopped. Mom, are you sure? I told her I'm always sure before I make a call like this one. That I said was something else Derek may not have known about me. What followed was fast and ugly. Derek confronted me at the restaurant 2 days later in his kitchen, surrounded by his staff letter, in hand, voice raised. He said I was vindictive, a bitter old woman who could not stand to see a younger man succeed. He said quite a lot, none of it quietly. I let him finish. Then I stepped close enough that he had to lean in to hear me. Derek, I said, I reduced your rent by 40% for 4 years because I wanted you to have a real chance. I owned the building you call your achievement. And when you decided I was too casual to sit at a birthday table, I decided your chance was over. That is not bitterness. That is accounting. I walked out through the dining room, past the exposed brick walls of a building I had owned for 6 years. My heels were steady. My hands did not shake. Did you think I would say something harsher? Sometimes the quiet line lands harder than the loud one. But here is the part I did not expect. The part that still stops me sometimes when I think about it. The following week, Vanessa, Derek's sister, who had been visiting for the party, posted a video on Facebook. She had filmed part of Derek's confrontation with me on her phone. The part where he was shouting edited it and posted it with the caption, "This woman is destroying our family over a lease dispute. Landlords like her are the problem." It got 3,000 shares in 48 hours. People who had never met me were calling me a predator, a vulture, an old woman with a grudge. My phone rang with numbers I did not recognize. One neighbor texted me a screenshot and said simply, "Is this you?" It was. What would you do if someone used a 30-second clip to rewrite the entire story of your life? I called Frances. She told me I could sue for defamation, but it would take years. I told her I had a better idea. I called the New Haven Civil Court Clerk's office and requested a certified copy of Gerald Whitmer's fraud judgment. I called the county assessor's office and pulled the full property transfer history on the home Gerald had sold to his nephew to avoid the lien. I gathered every bank receipt Frances had compiled, every wire transfer I had made to the restaurant account, every lease payment, every repair I had funded out of my own pocket. And then I posted it. Not a video, a document. 34 pages organized by year uploaded to a community Facebook group for local business owners with a single line of caption, "Here is the complete financial record. Decide for yourself." By the next morning, the comments had turned. A local business reporter called me for an interview. I declined. The document said everything that needed saying. Did you think that was the end of it? The restaurant closed 6 weeks later. The renegotiated rent combined with Derek's January loan was not sustainable once the numbers were honest. Gerald and Patricia left town quietly before the civil creditors in New Haven were notified of their forwarding address, which Frances had provided to the relevant parties as what she called a professional courtesy. Derek moved into an apartment on the east side. Claire moved into a small apartment near the university, where she had been quietly applying for an administrative position for 3 months. She told me later she had started the application before she fully understood why. She brought Lily. She left Derek. On a Saturday in August, we sat in my garden. Lily was building something between the tomato plants out of sticks and twine with the dead seriousness of a structural engineer. Claire was holding her coffee with both hands, the way she has since she was a teenager. She said, "I didn't know. It was not a defense. It was a confession. I told her I knew. Then she said she had been embarrassed by me, that she had let him make her embarrassed by me." Her voice broke on the last word in a way I had not heard since she was small. She said, "You built a company. You kept us going after Dad died. You owned that man's building and never said a word." I looked at the garden for a moment. Oh, the things we carry quietly, thinking it is humility when sometimes we have just made ourselves too easy to overlook. "I didn't need credit," I told her. "I needed a seat at my granddaughter's birthday." She laughed wet and unsteady. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder the way she did at 7 years old, and I let her. Lily looked up from her project. "Grandma Maggie, is this a good bridge or a bad bridge?" I studied it seriously. Sticks, twine, a flat piece of bark wedged in the center like a keystone. "That," I said, "is an excellent bridge." That evening, I sat in my car outside their apartment and watched Lily wave from the window. I did not feel victory. I felt tired in the good way, the way you feel after you have carried something heavy for a long time and finally set it down. The anger had left before the restaurant closed, before the documents were posted, before any of it. It left around the moment I stopped waiting for someone to recognize my worth and simply let them see it for themselves. I drove home through the summer dark windows down. Earl was on the porch step. My garden needed water. I had a book on the nightstand and nowhere I was required to be. The most powerful thing I did was not post the documents. It was not the lease amendment or the certified letter. It was deciding on a Tuesday evening in April that my dignity had a value no family dinner table could negotiate down. I had spent decades making myself smaller so others could feel larger. When I finally stopped, the ones who truly loved me had room to grow toward me, and the ones who didn't find out what it cost to build your life on someone else's foundation without ever asking whose name is on the deed. Now, I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever stayed quiet about your own worth, hoping the people around you would figure it out? What happened when they didn't tell me in the comments? I read every single one. And if the story reminded you of something true, press like and subscribe. There are more stories here where the quiet ones turn out to be the ones who were never quiet at all. They were just waiting for the right moment.